Why did no one look at her when the dismissal papers slid across the desk? Sergeant Kalia Thorne noticed that first. Not the words, not the signature, the silence. The way the room seemed relieved, as if an uncomfortable question had finally been answered without anyone having to speak it aloud. She folded the paper once, cleanly, as though it were just another piece of kit to be stowed away. Around her, the instructors stood rigid, eyes fixed anywhere but on her face. They had already decided who she was. Not loud enough. Not sharp enough. Not ruthless enough to belong in sniper school. Kalia didn't argue. She never had. Arguing required the belief that someone was listening. Outside, Fort Cavendish breathed its usual rhythm, boots on gravel, steel doors slamming, distant shots cracking through morning fog. The others moved with urgency, chasing time, chasing approval. Kalia moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured, each breath controlled. She returned to her bunk and knelt, reaching beneath it for the case she had never opened here. The rifle inside was not regulation. It had never been meant to be. Its metal was worn smooth in places where her hands had rested for years. Scratches marked distances, angles, wind calls remembered rather than written. She didn't lift it to her shoulder. She simply began to clean it, the way some people pray, quietly, precisely, without asking for forgiveness. By the time the fog lifted, the Skyran candidates were assembling on the long-range platform. Laughter broke out in sharp bursts. Confidence, loud and unearned, traveled easily among them. Someone muttered her name like a joke. Whisper Line, they called her, not because she whispered, but because she seemed to pass through without leaving a trace. She took her seat alone on the concrete block and began tightening a bolt. No rush, no show. When the timed assembly began, the others attacked their rifles like enemies. Parts flew. Voices shouted "done" like victory cries. Kalia finished last, 40 seconds behind. They smiled until inspection. Her rifle was flawless. Chief Warder Vaughn's voice cut through the air, cold and precise. Precision doesn't matter if you're dead before the shot. He was looking directly at her. She met his gaze for half a second, then looked away. Later, during wind calls, she spoke corrections no one else saw. They laughed until the targets answered for her. At lunch, she ate alone. At the obstacle course, she moved without spectacle, silent, efficient, unnoticed. That afternoon, they dismissed her. No ceremony, no second chance. Just silence. She packed the way she lived, folding clothing with geometric care. Beneath the final layer, she retrieved a battered satellite phone. The message waiting for her was brief, encrypted, familiar. She replied with 3 words, then closed it. Outside, one of the candidates smirked as she passed. Guess even Whisper Line knows when to quit. Kalia didn't turn toward the exit gate. She turned toward Range 9. By the time Vaughn realized she was there, the range was quiet. Too quiet. 3 rounds sat on the far target, grouped so tightly they looked like a single wound. The distance wasn't part of the day's curriculum. No one attempted shots like that here. When he demanded to know what she was doing, she didn't answer. She handed him the rifle. And that was when he saw the engraving beneath the scope mount. Coordinates. Dates. Confirmed eliminations across continents. At the bottom, a line that made his blood run cold. A mission that officially never existed. The air changed, phones came out, voices lowered. 15 minutes later, a black SUV rolled through the gate. Colonel Darren Cass didn't waste time with introductions. His eyes were already on Kalia. Let's continue this somewhere secure. Why had she stayed so calm when everyone doubted her? That was what one of the candidates asked as she walked past him. She paused, looked at him for the first time all day. Because this was never about proving anything, she said quietly. It was always about the mission. In the briefing room that night, the truth surfaced in fragments. 8 years earlier, Kalia Thorne had been flagged for extraordinary marksmanship and quietly rerouted into a program no one acknowledged. Obsidian Mark. Solo operators. Deep cover. Long waits. No recognition. No extraction unless absolutely necessary. Women were chosen not for fragility, but for invisibility. Kalia didn't speak while they talked about her. She never needed to. When asked why she'd returned, she answered simply, 8 years is a long time to be unseen. I asked to teach. The next morning, she took the candidates into the woods. No shooting, no movement. 2 hours later, she told them they were all dead. They argued until she showed them where she'd been watching from, hidden in plain sight, protected not by distance but by restraint. Sometimes, she told them, your job isn't to shoot, it's to survive long enough to know when not to. Even the loudest among them fell quiet. Weeks passed, the division changed, speed gave way to patience, aggression to awareness, manuals were rewritten, drills slowed. Kalia never raised her voice. She taught them how waiting felt, how doubt crept in, how your mind became your enemy long before the terrain did. When a real mission came, a mountain relay post broadcasting something far worse than signals, she was already in position before the team arrived. She adjusted for wind shear from memory, neutralized threats before they knew they were seen. When a second enemy element moved unseen, she noticed not through sensors, but through birds fleeing the valley. Later, they would struggle to explain how she appeared inside the compound before the breach team, how the corridor was already silent when they arrived. Captain Mercer pulled her aside afterward. That was Coast Province all over again. She scanned the horizon. This time, she said softly, I wasn't too late. Back at Fort Cavenreach, requests came in from everywhere. Training, consultation, doctrine. She accepted none of the praise. One night, alone under dim barracks light, she opened a case she hadn't touched in years. Her original field log, water damaged, blood stained. She added a single line. Not a name, not a number. Just that this time, she'd been able to write the ending. When asked what she would call her role now, she thought for a moment. I'm a ghost, she said. Sometimes I become a weapon. What's next? Vaughn asked. She gave a rare smile. That's classified. And as the wind carried another distant shot across the range, one truth settled quietly into the space she left behind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did she feel more exposed standing in front of a classroom than she ever had behind a rifle? Kalia noticed it the moment she stepped into the briefing room the next morning. The air wasn't hostile, it was worse, curious, measured, the kind of attention that didn't shout or challenge but weighed, assessed. 12 candidates sat at the long table, boots planted wide, arms folded or draped with practiced ease. Men who had learned to survive by being seen as confident, dangerous, ready. And here she was, quiet still, already underestimated again. She placed her gloves on the table and didn't sit. Standing kept her grounded. Sitting made it feel like an interview. She had done enough of those in rooms that pretended to be neutral while deciding her fate before she spoke. Before we begin, one of them said, unable to help himself, are we shooting today? A few smirks flickered and vanished. Kalia studied his face. Young, talented, the kind who had always been told he belonged. She nodded once. Eventually. That answer unsettled them more than refusal would have. She didn't start with slides or doctrine. She didn't mention her record. She didn't mention the rifle that had changed everything the day before. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out over the training grounds, where wind bent the grass in uneven waves. How many of you think you know what patience is? She asked. Several hands went up immediately. She let the silence stretch, then nodded again. You don't. A few stiffened. Others leaned back, arms tightening. She felt the shift, ego bracing for impact. She remembered that feeling well, the urge to prove something before anyone had asked. She turned back to them. Patience isn't waiting. Waiting is passive. Patience is active. It's the discipline of not acting when every instinct tells you to. She could see it landing unevenly. Some understood, most didn't. She gestured toward the door. Gear up, no weapons. That did it. Confusion rippled through the room. Someone laughed under their breath. Another shook his head. She caught whispers, soft, dismissive. Whisper line teaching patience without a rifle. The irony wasn't lost on her. They followed anyway. The woods swallowed sound quickly. Pines rose thick and uneven, needles softening every step. The candidates moved with trained caution, spreading out instinctively, scanning for threats that didn't exist. Kalia let them. She walked behind them at first, then slowly changed direction until they didn't notice she was gone. She found her position without thinking. A shallow depression beneath a fallen trunk, earth packed hard, visibility limited. Not ideal for shooting, perfect for not being seen. She settled in and waited. Time passed differently when you let it. She listened to their breathing before she saw them, felt their movement through the ground, watched as one by one they chose positions that made sense to them, good sightlines, clear escape routes, pride in clever placement. She waited longer. When she finally spoke, her voice came through their earpieces calm and unhurried. "You're all dead." Protests erupted immediately, voices overlapping, defensive, certain. She didn't interrupt. When they finished, she rose and stepped into view. Several flinched. One swore under his breath. "I watched every one of you choose a position based on what you wanted to see," she said, "not on who could see you." She walked them through it slowly, pointed out the exposed angles, the way a boot print caught light, the way breath fogged against bark, the places where confidence had made them careless. Her own hide was almost invisible, shielded from thermal, limited view, no dominance, just survival. "This isn't about control," she said. "It's about restraint." That word lingered. Later, alone again, Kalia felt the familiar ache settle into her shoulders. Teaching cost her something she hadn't expected. In the field, silence protected her. Here, silence invited interpretation, doubt, projection. She reminded herself why she'd asked for this. 8 years was a long time to disappear. The first real test came sooner than expected. A joint operation briefing arrived that evening. Mountain relay post, hostile territory, limited support. The kind of mission planners pretended was routine until things went wrong. Kalia studied the satellite imagery alone, long after the others had gone. She traced terrain lines with her finger, memorizing wind channels that wouldn't appear on any map. She recognized the pattern before anyone else did. When she spoke up in the planning room the next morning, the pause that followed was sharp. Several officers exchanged glances. One cleared his throat. "That's an unconventional assessment," he said carefully. She nodded. "So is the terrain." They didn't argue, not openly, but she felt it, the tension between experience earned and experience acknowledged. She was still proving herself despite everything. On the mountain, cold stripped emotion down to essentials. Her breath fogged once, then steadied. She lay prone beneath her shroud, body still enough that time blurred. Through her scope, the relay post breathed with mechanical rhythm. Drone sweeps, guard rotations, patterns that repeated until they felt inevitable. She remembered another mountain, another wait, another time she'd arrived too late. Her jaw tightened just once. The first shot came when the wind faltered, not when it stopped, but when it lied. She trusted the memory in her hands more than the numbers in her scope. The sentry fell without sound. The drone followed seconds later. When the secondary team moved in unseen, Kalia noticed the birds before anything else. They lifted suddenly, scattering downhill. She switched frequencies, listening past the static, catching the edges of voices that didn't belong. She moved. Later, no one could quite explain how she had covered the distance alone, how she cleared the corridor before the breach team reached the door, how 6 threats were neutralized without a single shouted command. Captain Mercer didn't ask for details afterward. He didn't need them. "That look you had," he said quietly as they watched the valley empty of danger. "I've seen it before." She nodded once, that was all. Back at the base, the candidates watched her differently, not with awe, with something more dangerous, respect earned through fear of the unknown. She kept them grounded, no war stories, no embellishment. When one asked how long she'd once held a hide, she answered simply, 17 days. The room went still. "No resupply," she continued. "No radio, just discipline." Someone swallowed hard. That night she opened her field log again. Her fingers paused over a page marked by an old stain. She added a line, not about the mission, but about the choice she'd made to move when waiting would have been easier. Redemption wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It came quietly in moments where you acted not for recognition, but because you couldn't live with the alternative. As she closed the log, Kalia allowed herself a single breath of something close to hope. Not because she was finally seen, but because maybe, just maybe, the next time someone like her stood alone at the edge of dismissal, the room would hesitate before looking away. Why did the quiet feel heavier now that people were finally listening to her? Kalia sensed it before anyone said a word. The way conversations softened when she entered a room. The way chairs subtly shifted to make space. Respect had arrived, but it came with weight. Invisibility had been simpler. You didn't owe anything to people who never saw you. Now eyes followed her, measuring not doubt anymore, but expectation. She didn't like that part. The candidates stood in formation on the range, rifles slung, posture sharp. A month ago they would have joked while waiting. Now they were silent, waiting on her. Kalia stopped 10 paces in front of them and let the moment stretch. Wind slid across the range, tugging at flags, whispering through scrub grass. She could feel their nerves. Anticipation always made people loud inside their own heads. "You've all been taught how to take a shot," she said finally. "Today you learn how not to." A few brows furrowed. One candidate shifted his weight. She noticed everything now, not because she was watching harder, but because they were trying harder not to be watched. She led them away from the range, toward a dry ravine carved deep into the far side of the training grounds. The walls dropped sharply, stone layered with loose gravel and old scars from erosion. A place most avoided, too unstable, too exposed. She stopped at the edge. "Your objective," she said, "is to cross this ravine without being detected." Someone almost laughed, caught himself. "Detected by who, Sergeant?" She looked at him calmly. "By me." They exchanged glances. Confidence flickered back in. One by one they descended, choosing routes that felt logical, covered paths, familiar tactics. Kalia stayed where she was, unmoving, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow. She didn't follow them. She listened. Gravel betrayed one. Fabric brushed rock another. A heartbeat spiked somewhere below. She marked each of them mentally, not with judgment but with precision. When the last candidate climbed out on the far side, she spoke quietly into the calm channel. "You're all compromised." Disbelief flared. Voices rose. Defenses went up fast when pride was threatened. She descended then, showing them the places they'd been heard, the shadows they thought were safe, the angles where impatience had undone them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You're trained to dominate terrain," she said, "but domination makes noise. Survival requires humility." That word hit harder than she expected. Humility. She remembered learning it the hard way. A rooftop in a city whose name she no longer allowed herself to say. A shot she'd waited too long to take. A body she'd arrived too late to protect. The past had a way of surfacing when she taught. She welcomed it. Pain sharpened instruction. That afternoon, Vaughn approached her as the candidates packed up. "Command, impressed," he said. "They want you to formalize your methodology, doctrine level." Kalia didn't answer immediately. She watched the last candidate sling his pack, shoulders tight, expression thoughtful rather than cocky. "I didn't come back to write manuals," she said. Vaughn nodded. "I know, but you're changing how they think." That was what unsettled her. In the field, consequences were immediate. Here they were slow, diffuse, harder to measure. The next request came from higher up. A consultation, not training, not instruction. A special forces unit prepping for a mountain insertion that intelligence didn't quite trust. The kind of mission that failed quietly when it failed at all. She almost declined. Almost. 3 days later, she stood on a tarmac far from Fort Cavenreach, wind tugging at her jacket as rotors slowed behind her. Captain Mercer waited near the convoy, face lined with fatigue that no rest could smooth out. "Appreciate you coming," he said, shaking her hand. His grip was firm, respectful, no posturing. She nodded. "You wouldn't have asked if it wasn't necessary." He smiled faintly. "That's what worries me." The team watched her openly this time. Veterans, confident, decorated. They didn't doubt her skill, they doubted her relevance. That was harder to fight. She didn't try. "Today is assessment," she told them. "Tomorrow we correct." They took turns on the range as the mountain played its games. Wind shifted without warning. Angles lied. Shots missed by inches that might as well have been miles. Frustration crept in fast, sharper because they weren't used to it. "This is impossible," one muttered. Kalia opened her rifle case slowly. The familiar weight settled into her hands like an old truth. "It's not," she said. "You're just fighting the mountain, I don't." She took a single shot. The steel rang. Silence followed, not stunned but sober. She didn't smile. That night, alone in temporary quarters, Kalia lay awake longer than she meant to. Teaching pulled memories loose. The mountain air smelled like other places, other nights. She thought of the people she'd never been able to save, the ones whose names lived only in her log. Redemption wasn't erasure. She knew that. It was alignment, doing now what you hadn't been able to do then. The mission brief came at dawn. Insertion at first light. Relay station suspected of controlling autonomous strike assets. Local resistance expected. Extraction uncertain. Kalia studied the map while Mercer briefed the team. She saw what the others missed. A wind corridor that would collapse mid-morning. A shadow line that would shift just enough to expose a prone shooter. She spoke once. "Your timeline is wrong," she said. The room stilled. She explained calmly, adjusted their plan by minutes that would matter more than miles. Mercer listened, trusted. On the mountain, time slowed again. Her body settled into stillness like it remembered something sacred. She watched the world narrow through glass and breath. When the first complication arose, it wasn't panic that moved her. It was memory. She remembered the last time she'd waited too long. She didn't repeat the mistake. Later, as the team regrouped and the mountain exhaled its silence back into place, Mercer stood beside her. "You didn't hesitate," he said. She shook her head. "I waited exactly long enough." Back at base, reports circulated. Success without spectacle, minimal engagement, no losses. Command wanted her everywhere. She declined most of it. That night she returned to Fort Cavenreach and stood alone on Range 12 as the sun dipped low, painting the ridgelines in burnished gold. Vaughn watched from a distance, saying nothing. She took one shot. The echo rolled away, swallowed by wind. For the first time in a long while, Kalia felt something settle inside her. Not pride, not relief. Balance. She wasn't invisible anymore, but she wasn't chasing recognition either. She was exactly where she needed to be. And sometimes that was enough. Why did the nights feel louder now, even when the range had gone quiet. Kalia noticed it after the mountain operation, after the reports had been filed and the praise filtered down in careful, measured language. Success without spectacle always unsettled people. There were no explosions to point to, no dramatic footage to replay. Just silence where threats had been. Just men returning alive. Those kinds of outcomes made administrators uneasy. She lay awake in her quarters at Fort Cavendish, listening to the bass settle. Doors closed. Footsteps faded. Somewhere far off, metal clinked against metal as someone cleaned a weapon with less care than it deserved. The ceiling above her held a hairline crack shaped like a fault line. She traced it with her eyes back and forth until her breathing slowed. Sleep came in fragments. When it did, it brought old places with it. A city roofline at dusk. Heat rising off concrete. A voice in her earpiece that never finished its sentence. She woke before the memory could end, heart steady but jaw clenched. That was the thing people never understood. Trauma didn't always come with panic. Sometimes it arrived as clarity, sharp, unavoidable. By morning, she was already on the range. The candidates arrived one by one, surprised to see her there ahead of them. She didn't acknowledge the looks. She adjusted wind flags herself, repositioned steel targets at uneven distances, angles that made no sense at first glance. When Vaughn joined her, coffee untouched in his hand, he watched quietly for a moment. "You don't have to prove anything anymore," he said. She didn't look up. "I'm not." He considered that. "Command thinks you are." That earned a pause. She set the last target and finally turned to face him. Command confuses movement with progress. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "They want to formalize your methods, precision veil, doctrine, global rollout." The words hung between them, heavier than any weapon. "I didn't survive to become a symbol," she said softly. "No," Vaughn agreed. "You survived because you adapted, and now others need that." She nodded once. Acceptance didn't mean agreement. It meant understanding what couldn't be avoided. The class that morning was different. No drills, no shots fired. She stood before them with nothing in her hands, no rifle, no notes. "Today," she said, "we talk about the weight." They shifted uneasily. Waiting was the part no one trained for. It didn't look good in after-action reports. It didn't make legends. She paced slowly, boots crunching gravel in a measured rhythm. Most failures don't happen in the shot. They happen before it, in the hours where nothing changes, in the moments where your mind starts inventing reasons to move. She saw it in their eyes, the discomfort of recognition. She told them about the 17-day hide, not the location, not the target, just the waiting, the hunger that dulled thought, the cold that crept inward, the way silence amplified every doubt. "Your body will betray you," she said. "Your mind will try harder." One candidate raised a hand, hesitant. "How do you stop it?" Kalia stopped packing, thought for a moment. "You don't, you manage it. You give your mind something smaller to focus on, breath, temperature, the weight of the rifle. You break time into pieces it can survive." She didn't tell them about the time she'd almost moved too soon, about the shadow she'd mistaken for motion, about the life that had ended elsewhere because she'd hesitated when she shouldn't have. Some lessons didn't need examples. That afternoon, a request arrived marked urgent, not from command, from a field unit operating off-record, coastal terrain, urban sprawl bleeding into jungle, intelligence fragmented, too many unknowns. Kalia read the brief twice. Her first instinct was no. Her second was memory. She met Vaughn at dusk. "I'll consult," she said. "No lead, no long-term attachment." He didn't argue. "You won't stay invisible forever," he warned. She gave a tired half-smile. "I was never invisible. People just didn't know how to look." The coastal city smelled like salt and exhaust. Heat pressed down even after dark, clinging to skin and fabric. The team she met was younger than Mercer's, sharp, fast, less patient. They listened politely as she spoke. That worried her more than skepticism would have. The relay node they were targeting sat inside a half-abandoned industrial zone. Drones overhead. Civilians too close for clean solutions. The team wanted speed. Kalia wanted stillness. She climbed alone to a vantage point the others dismissed as useless. Too cramped, too limited. But from there she could see what mattered, the rhythms between movements, the pauses no one noticed. Hours passed. The city breathed around her. Music drifted from somewhere distant. A dog barked, then went quiet. Her world narrowed to angles and light. When the moment came, it wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. A shift in pattern. A guard lingering half a second too long. She took the shot. The team moved in fast, clean, efficient. Extraction was tense but intact. Afterward, one of the younger operators approached her, helmet tucked under his arm. "You waited longer than I would have," he admitted. She nodded. "You would have moved sooner." "Yeah," he said, "probably." She met his eyes. "You'll learn." Back at Fort Cavenreach, the changes were visible now. Candidates spoke less, observed more. Even Trell Norin, the loudest of them once, moved differently. Quieter, thoughtful. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he approached her by the range. Hesitated. "Sergeant," he said, "I used to think you didn't belong here." She waited. "I was wrong." The apology wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. She inclined her head. "Belonging isn't assigned," she said. "It's earned through responsibility." He nodded, absorbing that. Later, alone again, she opened her field log, flipped past pages filled with coordinates and coded shorthand. She stopped at a blank page near the end. Her pen hovered. She wrote not about kills or distances, but about restraint. About choosing not to take a shot because someone might step into its path, about learning that strength sometimes meant letting the moment pass. She closed the book gently. The rifle waited beside her, familiar and patient. As night settled over the base, Kalia stepped outside and looked toward the darkened ridgelines. She felt the weight of what she was becoming, not a ghost, not a symbol, but something in between. A bridge. Between what had been demanded of her in silence and what she could now demand of others. The path forward wasn't clean. It never was. But for the first time, she wasn't walking it alone. And sometimes, that was the quiet victory no one thought to measure. Why did the call come at night, when the world was quiet enough to hear old doubts breathing? Kalia answered on the second ring. She always did. Silence was easier to manage when you didn't let it linger too long. The voice on the other end didn't introduce itself. It didn't need to. The cadence alone told her this wasn't a training request or a consultation disguised as courtesy. "This is off the record," the voice said. "If you say no, this call never happened." Kalia sat on the edge of her bunk, boots unlaced, rifle case resting against the wall where it always did. "Then ask," she replied. A pause, respectful, measured. "Coast Province, new cell, same corridor." Her chest tightened, not sharply, not visibly, just enough to remind her where certain memories lived. Coast Province was a name that never fully faded. It wasn't a mission failure on paper. It was worse, a success that arrived late. She closed her eyes. "Details," she said. The target wasn't just a person this time. It was a convergence, a node of decisions that, if left intact, would cost lives quietly and repeatedly. Urban density, civilian overlap, no margin for error, the kind of situation that punished impatience more than hesitation. "We don't need a trigger pull," the voice continued. "We need certainty." That word stayed with her after the line went dead. Certainty was rare, dangerous even, but she understood what they meant. They needed someone who knew when not to shoot just as deeply as when to act. She didn't sleep after that. By morning, Vaughn already knew. He always did. He found her on range 12, adjusting her scope though she wasn't firing. "You're going," he said. She didn't confirm or deny it. "I'll observe." He studied her face, searching for something, fear maybe, or reluctance. He found neither. "This one's personal," he said carefully. Kalia exhaled slowly. "That's why I can't let it be." The insertion wasn't dramatic. No fanfare, no speeches, just a transport lifting her into a sky the color of old steel. She traveled light. No insignia, no expectation of acknowledgement. The city was louder than she remembered, or maybe she was quieter now. She established her position before dusk, tucked into the skeleton of an unfinished high-rise overlooking the corridor in question. From here, she could see the pulse of movement, vendors closing shop, children darting between shadows, men pretending not to watch. The wait began. Hours passed, then more. She cataloged details not because she needed to, but because it kept her anchored. A flickering light 2 buildings down, a window that opened twice but never a third time, a radio burst that didn't belong. Her mind tried to wander. It always did eventually. It offered her old images, old endings. She didn't let it. She returned to breath, to weight, to the steady truth of gravity pressing her into place. Just before midnight, the pattern shifted. A vehicle arrived without headlights. Doors opened too carefully. Men moved like they believed they were unseen. One of them paused, looked up, almost directly at her position. Kalia didn't move. She let the moment pass through her rather than over her. She waited until certainty replaced suspicion. When she finally adjusted her aim, it wasn't at a head or a chest. It was at a hand reaching for something no one else could see. The shot cracked once. Contained, controlled. The reaction below was chaos without clarity. Shouts, confusion, retreat. The convergence unraveled not because she eliminated a leader, but because she disrupted intent. She didn't fire again. By dawn, the corridor was empty. The cell dissolved without ever knowing how close it had come to being seen. Extraction took longer than planned. She didn't mind. She rarely did. On the return flight, alone with the hum of engines and her own thoughts, the weight finally arrived. Not guilt, not pride. Grief. Not for the target, but for the younger version of herself who had once believed perfection could prevent loss, who had learned instead that precision only narrowed the space where regret lived. Back at Fort Cavendish, no announcement was made. No commendation followed, just a quiet acknowledgement that the threat was gone. That night, she opened her field log to the page marked with the old stain. She didn't add coordinates this time. She wrote one sentence. "I waited long enough." The next morning, the candidates noticed something different about her. Not fatigue, not distance, something softer, heavier. She taught them anyway. She spoke about uncertainty, about accepting that some outcomes could never be confirmed, only trusted, about how the need for validation could be more dangerous than fear. "Sometimes," she said, "you never know if you made the right call. You just know you made the most honest one." Trelnorin listened harder than anyone. Later, Vaughn found her watching the range from the tower. "You okay?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "I'm aligned," she said. He nodded. That was enough. As the sun dipped low again, Kalia felt the quiet settle, not as absence but as presence. A companion rather than a void. She hadn't erased the past. She hadn't redeemed it entirely. But she had stepped into its shadow and chosen differently. And sometimes, that was the only victory that mattered. Why did it feel heavier to stay than it ever had to leave? Kalia noticed it on an ordinary morning. No alarms, no urgent calls, just sunlight sliding across the range and the quiet hum of a base waking up without urgency. Those were the days that tested her most, when there was no mission to hide inside, no distance to measure herself against. She stood at the edge of range 12, hands resting lightly on the railing, watching candidates move through a drill she had designed months earlier. Four-angle wind compensation, limited visibility, no timer. Speed had been removed on purpose. They were better now, not perfect, better. She could see it in how they waited before adjusting, how they checked each other's blind spots without being told, how no one rushed to be first. That had been the real change, not their shooting, their restraint. Behind her, Boots approached slowly. Vaughn stopped beside her without speaking. They had learned each other's silences well. "Commands finalizing precision veil," he said eventually. "Global doctrine, your methods, your language." She didn't respond right away. Watched a candidate abort a shot because the wind lied at the last second. A good call, an invisible one. "I never wanted ownership," she said. "You're not owning it," Vaughn replied. "You're anchoring it." She exhaled. Ownership implied ego. Anchoring implied responsibility. She could live with that. "They want you permanent," he added. "Not just here, oversight, advisory, selection boards." Kalia closed her eyes briefly. She thought of rooftops and ridgelines, of places where her presence had been measured in millimeters and seconds, of how simple life had once been when success meant silence and survival. "I'll stay," she said finally, "but on my terms." Vaughn smiled faintly. "I expected nothing less." The final evaluation cycle came faster than she anticipated. The candidates didn't know it was final. She hadn't told them. Pressure changed behavior, and she needed to see who they were when they didn't know they were being measured. She sent them into the field before dawn. No clear objective, minimal instruction, just a region marked on a map and a time they were expected back. Confusion surfaced immediately, then frustration, then adaptation. Kalia followed at a distance they never detected. She watched one candidate break off to cover another without being asked. Saw Trell Norin choose a worse vantage point because it kept his teammate hidden. Not optimal, humane. When they returned, tired and mud-streaked, she didn't congratulate them. She asked one question. "Who here thinks they succeeded?" A few hands went up, then slowly lowered as they reconsidered. She nodded. "Good, you're learning." Later, as they cleaned their rifles in quiet concentration, Trell approached her again. Hesitated the way confident people did when they were learning humility for the first time. "Sergeant," he said, "what happens when you do everything right and it still goes wrong?" Kalia didn't answer immediately. She wiped down the bolt of her rifle, movement slow and familiar. "Then you carry it," she said, "but you don't let it define your next decision." He absorbed that, didn't ask more. That night she received the message she had been expecting for years. Not urgent, not dramatic, just a notification that the Obsidian Mark program, what remained of it, was officially closed. Assets reassigned. Files sealed deeper than before. Ghosts being retired. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief. Closure was never that clean, but acknowledgement, a quiet one. She walked alone to the far end of the base where the lights thinned and the land opened into dark, patient space. She lay prone on the cool ground out of habit, eyes tracing the sky. No scope, no target. Just distance. For the first time, she allowed herself to think of the names she never wrote down, the faces she carried without permission. She didn't flinch from them anymore. They were part of her, not weights but markers. The next morning, the final briefing room was full. Not just candidates, instructors, observers, people who had once dismissed her now waited for her to speak. She stood at the front without a rifle. "I won't tell you what this job makes you," she said. "You'll decide that on your own, but I will tell you what it costs." The room was silent. It costs certainty. It costs comfort. Sometimes it costs the version of yourself you thought you'd be. She let that settle. If you're here to be seen, she continued, this will break you. If you're here to be right every time, it will humble you. But if you're here to protect something you may never be thanked for, then you might endure. She didn't ask for questions. When the ceremony ended, quiet, understated, Kalia didn't stay. She packed the same way she always had. Efficient, precise. But this time she didn't feel like she was disappearing. Vaughn walked her to the gate. You'll come back, he said, not a question. She nodded, I already have. He watched her go, understanding that some people didn't belong to places. They passed through them, leaving changes that lasted longer than their footprints. Kalia drove until the base lights fell behind her. The road stretched open and unremarkable, exactly the way she liked it. She pulled over once, just before dawn, and took out her field log. She turned to the last blank page. For a long moment she didn't write. Then she closed the book and put it away. Some things didn't need to be recorded to be real. As the sun rose, she felt something unfamiliar settle into her bones. Not rest, not pride. Peace. Not because she had been understood, but because she had acted with integrity when no one was watching. And in a world obsessed with noise, speed, and recognition, she had proven something quieter. Sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't demand space. Sometimes it simply stays. Steady, unseen, and enough.